I read an article the other day that said 20% of Australians suffer from anxiety. And I thought, geez, I've got a lot of experience with dealing with people with anxiety, and maybe I should share it. So, here's some hints and tips and ideas about what you can do if you do suffer from anxiety, whether that's minor or major, doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing, and it's a question of degree. So, here's the problem: anxiety is actually a version of fear. So the bottom line emotion is emotion of something that we need to be aware of, that we need to be cutting off or stopping or making sure it doesn't happen. So anxiety masquerades as a protector. It tells you that if you get anxious about something, you'll see a disaster likely to happen and you'll be able to cut it off at the pass, that you'll be able to take actions which cut off possible disasters. When you think about it, that's based on our imagination. So here's the terrible thing. What we do is we use our imagination to go into the future, imagine something happening, whether that's in an hour or whether that's next week. It's still in the future, so it hasn't happened yet. So we use our imagination to create a disaster. I call it catastrophizing. In other words, I could go into the future and I can imagine something wonderful, something exciting. The trouble is, lots of people say, well, what's the point of imagining that? It may not happen. And I'd say, what's the point of imagining something that's a catastrophe? It may not happen. So anxiety tends to be future paced. In other words, what I do is I pace my life around. The speed that I'm running at has a lot to do with what I'm imagining is going to happen in the future. But when I start to imagine from the negative perspective, I'm constantly looking for what could go wrong and what I shouldn't say and where I shouldn't go and who might say this, and don't put this person in the room with that person because that might be a clash and that would be a disaster. That's all imagination. The trouble is it becomes a habit. And so the habit that I get into is a habit of wanting to think of every possible disaster that could happen and then take steps or actions to prevent those possible disasters from happening. Now, if you're a designer of airplanes, that's a bloody good idea. We need very anxious people designing our airplanes, because if we do, then what that means is we get superior quality airplanes, because what they do is they make sure nothing can go wrong because they imagine every possibility. And then we train the pilots to handle those possibilities. But if you're not a professional pilot or a professional airplane designer, the chances are you're spending a lot of time being anxious about something that hasn't happened yet and very well may not happen. Mark Twain was famous for saying, I've had lifetimes of troubles and worries, most of which never happened. So when we look at it, when anxiety, because it's a habit, in other words, anything that's a habit happens automatically and it's running before you know that it's running. So as that shows up, then we start to think it's part of the way that I am. We don't recognize this is just actually a bad mental habit. We could easily reverse it, and I'll give you some hints and tips about how to do that. But if you don't think about it, if you don't become consciously aware of what's going on, instead of calling it a habit, you say it's just the way I am. I'm naturally anxious. And I would say that isn't true. It's the way that you've been trained. Well, what happens when the habit's allowed to run for long enough is the anxiety becomes chronic. Now, chronic anxiety, in other words, is sort of there constantly. You find that, someone's only got to beep the horn and your heart skips a few beats, or, you hear a baby crying and something goes on in your body and you react to that. Then what chronic anxiety does is it creates paralysis. Like I said before, anxiety is a version of fear. And so what fear does is it sneaks up close to you as if it's a friend, as if it's trying to protect you. And in some cases it does. But what it says is stop. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. Stay still because it's dangerous out there. You could get in massive trouble. Stay back here with me where it's safe. So the message of fear is don't do anything. Well, that creates paralysis. It creates all sorts of other weird things that go on around it as well. But that whole concept of paralysis, if you're saying, what does that show up like? Well, it shows up as procrastination. It shows up as I haven't done the thing that I wanted to do and I can't tell you why. Except that when I think about doing it, I get a bit anxious. And so to make the anxiety go away, I'll stop thinking about doing it and say I'll do it later. And the anxiety subsides and I'm okay. Really what we're doing there is we're getting the feeling that's ugly and difficult to deal with and pushing it down by changing what we're going to do, rather than saying, okay, I need to grow and become bigger than this. We allow the emotion to run us. And so our emotions run us and then things go haywire. There are all sorts of other things that turn up with anxiety or as a consequence of anxiety. Insomnia is probably one of the most common side benefits of anxiety, is because when your brain's amped up all day looking out for what could go wrong, it's difficult to amp it back down again to go to sleep. We get hypertension, which can show up as, high blood pressure, things going wrong in your system, inability to relax, inability to sit and be comfortable. And probably the main one is the desire to establish control. So if you reckon you've got a bit of control freak in you, it's probably propelled by anxiety, because the thinking simply says, well, all of these things that could go wrong, if I could get them under control, I could prevent them from going wrong. And then I could relax. The trouble is, there's so many things that could go wrong. We never actually relax. And so we spend more and more time trying to get more and more things under our control. We become known as a control freak, so people start to work against that, actively undermine it or wood-ant it or white-ant it, and the sense of control never actually turns up. So the relaxation that it would theoretically create never turns up as well. Well, that's enough about it. What are the solutions? Well, basically, I've got a few. All of these things won't work for all people, but you'll find something on this list that will work for you. So, number one, but not necessarily the most important thing, is to say to yourself, am I okay? Right now, at this point in my life, in this moment, right here, right now, am I okay? Am I safe? Is there enough air? Is there enough water? Is there enough food? Are there people outside with machine guns? Am I okay? 99.9% of the time, the answer is yes, you're okay. So you can just stop worrying about whether you're okay or not. So for some people, it's called a pattern break. Anthony Robbins is famous for saying a pattern break stops the brain from running along a normal pathway, which I'm saying in this case is a habit. So are you okay right now? Well, yeah, I've taken a look around me and yep, there's no threats, there's no worries, there's a few things coming over the horizon, but right now, in this moment, I'm okay. So that's one thing that may work for you. I've seen it work for lots and lots of people. Of course, you have to remember to say that, but that's part of forming another habit. Second thing that you might try, once again, not necessarily in order, but the second thing you might try is, what do I need right now? Do I need someone to reassure me? Do I need to just check in with other people around me that I'm correct in my assessment of the situation, that maybe I should be anxious or maybe I shouldn't. So what do I need in terms of help or support or space or time or resources that are going to help me deal with this in a much more successful way than just changing my behaviour so that it goes away? Third, and probably the most successful for the largest number of people, is what we call square breathing. And square breathing is simply 4-phase breathing activity. You breathe into the count of 4. So you breathe into the count of 4, you hold it for the count of 4, you breathe out for the count of 4. Most people find that difficult, to let their breath out slowly. We're big time gaspers in our culture. And then we hold no breath for count of 4. So that's in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. I'll demonstrate it like this. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Difficult for me to do that while I'm talking. Hold it, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, 2, 3, 4. Square breathing, for most people, for most of the time, works wonders. The only problem with it is remembering to do it, because anxiety tends to become habitual, it tends to become the normal background, and we don't notice that we're actually a bit hyper and we're actually a bit wound up. And sometimes it takes other people to remind us of that. So there's a question of awareness, and it's a question of how much you want to make a change. So square breathing is going to be fantastic. Presencing works, and what I mean by presencing is turning up in the current moment. I have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter, and I just love spending time with her. And I've heard grandparents say, isn't it great playing with the little tackers because you can give them back? I don't think it's because you can give them back. I don't want to give her back. I'd take her home if I had the choice, and I'd deal with the tantrums and the dirty nappies and all of that. It would be a pleasure. I think here's what happens is that I was on the floor playing puzzles with my granddaughter the other day, and I got up, and because I'm 68, I said to my wife Mary, I said, "Oh, I'm a bit stiff, you know. Oh, maybe that's a sign of age and getting up and down off the floor and all of that sort of stuff." She said, "It's not your age, you idiot." She said, "You've been there for an hour and a half." Well, to me, it had felt like 5 minutes. In other words, that little tacker actually made time stand still. And I think that when we get activities that make time stand still, we are our best selves. And certainly I wasn't experiencing any anxiety with playing with her with the puzzles and those kind of things. It was just that rare experience of being in the moment for a long period of time, which for her is all day, every day. So, you know, if I could learn anything, it would be from the 2.5-year-old. And finally, the other thing to practice is, and once again, no particular order of importance, is the realization that we don't have any control. That whilst we think that we can control people around us and circumstances around us and all of those sort of things, we actually can't. So anxiety turns up because we're trying to establish control and we actually can't do that. You can't control. You know, if you're driving down a 3-lane highway, all 3 cars going in the same direction, you can't control whether that person next to you is going to suddenly swerve into you, hit the brakes, accelerate, pull out a gun and aim it at you. You can't control any of that. But of course, what we do is we try and control that. What we don't realise is that control is beyond us. The only thing you can control is yourself. And if you think about that, anxiety is actually a lack of control of ourselves. Because what we could do is we could say to ourselves, I could worry about that, or I could just wait and see what they're going to do. Because if it's the politicians, if it's the business next door, it's the family next door, we can't control what they're going to do. We just wait and see what our response to that is going to be. When you're in anxiety, what happens is you react to things, which means you're bound into it, rather than having the space to sit back and say to yourself, I'm going to choose a response here. And the response might be to just leave it alone and not step into the anxiety as it is. So let me just go through those things again. There's 5 or 6 of them. Are you okay right now? What do you need right now in terms of support or help? Do the square breathing. Get yourself into the present moment by thinking about what you could do that's actually right here, right now, and realise that control is an illusion. Try those things. Let me know how it goes.